kind of world government the left and the right have in mind. They're talking about total world government, with all major decisions being made at the top and people at the bottom being essentially living in a feudalist society, just serfs and peasants, basically, in a high-tech feudalism. And the left and the right both agree with that goal, and so they never discuss it in public debate. Another thing in which they agree is the dominance of the banking system in our economy and, to a large extent, in our politics. They both agree that the banks are supreme, that the banks must be protected, that the banks must be funded, they must be bailed out, they must not be allowed to fail. When the banks make bad loans to third world countries, or if they make bad loans to large corporations, both the Republicans and the Democrats agree that we must come in with taxpayers' money, either tax money or inflation money, and we must bail out the banks. And we do that, they both agree, by giving the money to these corporations and giving the money to the third world countries so that they can continue to make interest payments to the banks. So those are two major issues, I would say perhaps the largest issues we could possibly face. And so we find that Republicans and Democrats are in agreement on that. You might add another third topic if you wish, and that is our role in the Middle East. Both parties talk alternately about, oh, we've got to end this war in the Middle East, pull our troops home, you know, and all that sort of thing. But that's just rhetoric. You notice we go from one party to the other. The war continues, the war grows, the funding continues. So there we have three major issues, perhaps the three largest issues of all. And there's no debate between Republicans and Democrats as to what to do. Though there may be some debate in rhetoric, they may give speeches, but when it's time to vote in Congress, there's no division between them at all. And this itself should be the biggest giveaway as to what the reality of politics is today. If anybody that's got their eyes open, they ought to be able to see it just by examining those three issues. I do believe that when Ron Paul ran for president and, to everyone's amazement, achieved such great support in spite of the roadblocks that were put in front of him, and in spite of the total disinterest on the part of the major media, so that he was practically unknown to large segments of the people. Parenthetically, I would say that if the media had given Ron Paul anywhere near the same exposure they gave to the Republican and Democrat, I mean the old-style Republican and Democrat Party candidates, I think he probably would have been elected. But anyway, that was sort of a phenomenal event, that somebody who did not have the endorsement of the establishment and who spoke so clearly on issues, the very issues that we were talking about, the issues of the war, the issues of the economy, and bailing out the banks and the Federal Reserve System, and the issue of national sovereignty. These are issues that mainstream Republicans and Democrats don't want to touch because they agree on that. Ron Paul disagreed with what the Republican and Democrat Party were doing on that, and so he spoke about it. And the fact that, in spite of the fact that he was the only one talking about these issues, he got so much support, tells me that there is a latent power, there's a latent awareness on the part of the American people just waiting to be tapped. I think those who are controlling the two-party system are very much afraid of that. They don't want that to be tapped. And that's why they are working so hard now to put controls on the internet, because the message that Ron Paul was delivering was primarily delivered over the internet, not through the major channels of communication. So now we see almost daily efforts on the part of the mainstream political figures to concoct different ways and different reasons and different excuses for putting controls on the internet. They're going to license people so that you can't even have a blog, they say, unless you have a license from the government. They want to put filters on the search engines so that you can't even look up certain words and things like that. Actually, I think what they're trying to do here in this country is pretty much imitate what they're already doing in China, for example. They really admire that system in China. Our own figures here in this country, although they may speak with scorn about a closed society in China, they're doing everything they can to imitate it. So that's one of the realities we have to look at. So what does this mean for the future? I think that as long as the internet can be kept open and free, it bodes very well for us, because I think we do have at last a chance to get around the mainstream media. But I think that if the governments of the world, and particularly in our own government, if they're successful in putting legal restrictions on and clamping down on the internet, I'm afraid that the chances of a maverick moving against the establishment become very, very small indeed. I believe that getting a man in the White House is not as important as it would seem at first. In fact, I think it's almost counterproductive, because as long as we focus on getting a man in the White House, there's the underlying assumption that that's all we need to do. Americans are of that nature. They want quick, simple solutions to problems. They want to know who you're going to vote for. That's it. Because they think that they can discharge their responsibility of citizenship by going to the polls every 2 years and maybe spending 20 minutes and putting a little mark on a piece of paper and walk out and say, okay, I've done my job. I've defended my country. Doesn't work that way, because by the time you go to the polls and you put your pencil mark on the paper or punch the lever, whatever you do, the decisions are already made. The candidates have already been selected. And the work goes on there, is who selects the candidates that the people vote for? Who frames the issues that the people vote for? Voting is nothing. It's all done before that stage. So as long as people think in terms of who we're going to vote for, what man are we going to get into the White House, they're looking in the wrong direction. They don't realize the scope of the problem. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have the right man in the White House. That could be very important. What I am saying is that the task is much bigger than that. People need to become active in politics. They need to become active in their communities and in disseminating information and helping to create public opinion and awareness on the issues so that it would be possible for the right man to be elected. Right now, you know, Ron Paul probably would have more support if people understood more about the Federal Reserve System. When he started to speak about it early in his campaign, most people were saying, huh, what's all that about? But because of the internet, and because of the distribution of so much material on the Federal Reserve System, including my book, which probably played a small part in that, there was a substantial number of people who did understand that, hey, wait a minute, the Federal Reserve System isn't a government agency, it's a cartel, it's a banking cartel, and it's working against the public interest. So when there was enough people that could say that and understand what they were talking about, all of a sudden the momentum began to move toward Ron Paul instead of away from him. Yes, people still said, I don't know what he's talking about, but more and more people were saying, I do know what he's talking about, and he's right on target. And you reach a critical mass with that. When enough people start saying, yes, yes, he's right, then the others who don't know anything are listening say, what are they talking about? And now they take an interest. So I think that we're almost at the point now of this tipping point, or the critical mass, where people do understand the scam behind the Federal Reserve System. I think if Ron Paul and other candidates would just continue emphasizing this issue alone, I think it could make the difference. It could be the difference between recapturing the country and not doing so. Back to the old line political figures in the Republican Party, it is true. When you compare that with Obama, Obama came to power riding this crest of beautiful rhetoric about change and making a difference and taking America back and all of that sort of thing. And people responded to it emotionally. And that was it. There was no substance, but it sounded good. And they were mad. They were mad at the present regime. They didn't like the Bush administration. They were angry. So anybody that spoke about change, well, that was their man, right? Okay, here we are. Another cycle is passing, and people are now mad. But this time, they're mad at the Obama administration. So the same political trick is being played again, but this time on the part of the Republican Party. The Republican candidates now are issuing great emotional, heartwarming statements about loving their country and restoring the Constitution, taking our country back, bringing about change, reducing government, and so forth. and you look at who is saying these things. I mean, people like Newt Gingrich, for example. If you look at his voting career, he voted against the Constitution more often than not throughout his whole political career. He's great at giving speeches. He uses all the right trigger words and phrases. But here's a guy talking about taking back the Constitution when he himself has been one of the great attackers of the Constitution by his votes in Congress. So it's come to the point where people have to stop listening to the rhetoric and start looking at the actual voting record of these people. I don't care whether it's Republican or Democrat. That's not the issue. It was Lenin who said it so well. Lenin said, words are one thing, actions another. Of course, when Lenin wrote that, what he was telling his followers is that tell them what they want to hear. Don't worry about telling a lie. They want to hear lies, he said. Words are one thing. Tell them what they want to hear. Get elected. Come to power. When you're in power, he said, then do what you want to do. Words are one thing, actions another. So he was advocating lying. Well, believe me, professional politicians understand this same technique. They would never come out and advocate it in public. They'd deny it. But look at their records. Don't listen to their words. Look at their actions, and then you'll know what kind of a game they're playing with us. Well, both Republicans and Democrats, both left-wingers and right-wingers, use this tactic of trying to discredit their opposition. And they're very good at it. And they know that if you come to the point where there is a serious debate underway about a serious issue, the best thing is back away from the debate, stay away from the issues, because they will lose. So they start attacking their opponent's character or their intelligence, or they try and look for something in their past to make them seem like they're evil people. And it's called demonizing. You demonize the opposition. This is an old tactic. It's been going on for a long, long time. And yes, I've seen it over the years where they have taken a group like the John Birch Society, and which is just an educational organization, but it was an educational organization dealing with principles and real historical facts, and they pretty well succeeded in convincing everybody in America that the Birchers were a bunch of, at the least, they were a bunch of little old ladies in tennis shoes, but at worst, they were a bunch of Nazis and fascists and racists, and they were even called communists. And so it didn't make any difference. You just call them some name, and if you keep doing that often enough, and in major channels of communication, most people will believe it. So that's a tactic that's well used, and I think we have to be alert to it. Also, we have to be alert to the fact that the people that we're talking about, these elitists, it's hard to find a better word, but the ones who want to really control this international collectivist government, they are not dumb. They have a lot of money, and they have think tanks that work out strategies. And one of the strategies they have always used is to lead their own opposition. And they try to lead their own opposition because, first of all, they know there's going to be opposition, so why wait around? Why wait around for real opposition to develop? If you know what's going to happen, send your own people out there and let them pretend to be your opposition, and everybody will follow them, especially if they're well-funded. And if they give the right speeches and say the right words, you know, those nice campaign speeches, for example. But they're really controlled by the very people they're speaking against. I came across that when I was doing research for the Federal Reserve System, because I realized that in the early days, the very bankers who put together this cartel and drafted the Federal Reserve Act, it was their bill. When it came time to promote it to the public, they funded and actually delivered their own opposition. Some of these bankers went forth and started giving speeches and interviews to newspaper reporters saying, oh, this bill is bad. It's bad for America. It's going to damage the economy. And they knew that the average person reading that in the newspaper would say, oh my goodness, Maude, listen to this. These bankers don't like the Federal Reserve Act very much. Must be pretty good. You know? So they play this game. So we know that this is still going on today. And for example, in the Tea Party movement, if they want to discredit it, if they can't control it, okay, let's say if one of the parties can't control it, they'll have to discredit it. So they will, and I believe already have attempted to